Would you like to establish a business in Germany? Found a startup? Do you want to work independently in Germany or become a managing director of a company? Then you need a residence permit to work and live in Germany. And this video will show you how to get it. My name is Romy Graske. I am one of the attorneys and partners at Graske Rechtsanwälte law firm. We advise startups and companies in the field of labor migration and would like to share our experience with you on this topic today. If you want to have the right of residence for a self-employed activity in Germany, you have to apply for it first of all. Usually, there are two ways to do this. The first is the visa procedure. It means that you are still in your current country of residence and would like to enter Germany for the first time. Then you have to initiate the visa procedure at the German embassy in your home country and apply for a residence permit for the purpose of self-employment. There are a few selected countries whose nationals are allowed to enter Germany without first applying for visa and obtain a right of residence directly in Germany. These are, for example, the following countries: the USA, Israel, Canada, Japan, Korea and some other countries. But as a rule, you have to operate the visa procedure from your home country. If you are already in Germany and have a right of residence which is about to expire, you can apply for the new right of residence here in Germany, but with the restriction that the change of the purpose of the stay from one to another is not that simple sometimes. Such cases are to be examined individually by a lawyer. So, what are the legal requirements for you to be able to set up your own business here in Germany? How do you get a right of residence for your self-employed activity in Germany? For instance, our capital Berlin. Berlin has become the capital of founders, startups and young entrepreneurs over the last decades. An infinite number of startups are being founded here. So how can you establish your business here in Berlin, for example? In your application, you must prove that your company provides an economic interest of Berlin, which means that there must be some regional need for Berlin, which might be reduced by you founding a company here. Classic examples of companies that introduce a regional need in Berlin are companies from the biotechnology sector, the digital sector, and above all, companies that create new jobs in Berlin and strengthen Berlin's economy. Your entrepreneurial activity must therefore have a positive impact on the Berlin economy. You also have to prove that you can finance your business either with your own capital or because you have a loan commitment. In order to prove that your company has the advantage for the Berlin economy, you have to submit certain documents to the immigration office together with your application. The most important documents you have to submit to the immigration office for your right of residence are the following: company profile, business plan, business concept, capital requirement plan, financing plan, return forecast, curriculum vitae. These documents are not exhaustive, but they are the most important and above all, the most decisive for you to be granted the right of residence at the end. Attention! Now there comes the most important information for you in this video. These documents, namely your business plan, your return forecast, your capital requirements plan, generally all the documents that are supposed to prove the planning of your company must be prepared as best you can. The better you prepare these documents, the more plausible your business plan and your overall business concept are, the more likely it is that you will be granted your right of residence without any problems. Why is it so? Because the immigration office can use these documents to check whether your company or your planned self-employment will have a positive effect on the Berlin economy. On the basis of these documents, the immigration office will check your business planning then, whether this business planning can be successful, whether it will have a positive effect on the Berlin economy. The immigration office will therefore examine your entire concept. They will also examine your entrepreneurial experiences on the basis of your curriculum vitae. For example, they will check whether you have already successfully founded a company in other countries countries, or whether you have already successfully managed a company in Germany in previous years. The immigration office checks how much capital you are planning to invest and, above all, what impact your company has on the employment and educational situation in Berlin. Obviously, the more working places are brought to Germany and new jobs created, especially in new technology areas, the greater is the interest of the city of Berlin in you setting up your company. The Berlin Immigration Office, for example, assumes that you can be granted this right of residence without further ado if your company creates at least 5 working places in Berlin or your minimum investment sum is at least 250,000 euro. And very important, especially companies that are very innovative and active in the field of research and development will, of course, easily obtain a residence permit here. To sum up, you have to prepare the documents you submit to the immigration office as best you can in order to convince the immigration office that your company will be successful and that it will have a positive effect on the Berlin economy. In our practice as attorneys, we repeatedly witnessed the situations that this right of residence is not being granted. The immigration office rejects the application for the right of residence. What are the reasons why the immigration office wants to reject the right of residence, and when does it make sense to involve a lawyer? What many people do not know or are not aware of is that the right of residence in Germany is largely a matter of discretion. This means that the Residence Act does not clearly define who gets a right of residence and who does not. The best example is the right of residence for a self-employed activity according to paragraph 21 of the Residence Act, which states that you can set up a business in Germany. It is written in the law. The immigration office can grant the right of residence for a self-employed activity if your company has positive effects on the German economy. For example, if Germany has an economic interest in you setting up your company here in Germany. But how do you determine whether Germany has an economic interest? And this question should be answered by the immigration office in Germany at their discretion, according to certain predefined criteria. But this already demonstrates that a decision can be different from caseworker to caseworker. And because the right of residence is largely a right of discretion, a reputable lawyer cannot guarantee that you will get your right of residence in the end. A very good lawyer will provide support in this case, namely preparation of the application documents, business plan, business concept, legal framework, and help you to overcome the language barrier by reviewing the documents for linguistic persuasiveness in order to convince the immigration office that there do exist an economic interest for Germany if you found your company here. A lawyer also supports the companies in preparing of the legal requirements and by taking over the coordination between the various authorities, because often, for example, the Chamber of Industry and Commerce must also be involved in the application procedure. Here, it is important to contact the relevant authorities in order to find out which individual criteria you have to meet for the right of residence. The lawyer will find out what is the current economic situation in Berlin and where there is a regional need that is best meeting your company's profile. Why is it so important? Especially the immigration office in Berlin tends to prematurely reject applications for residence rights. However, before the immigration office rejects your application, they send you a so-called hearing letter in which is written, "We intend to reject the requested right of residence for the reasons stated in this letter." You, as the applicant, must then respond to the letter from the immigration office in a written form and try to convince the immigration office that the prerequisite for the permit of the right of residence is fulfilled. Not later than at this point, you should definitely call in an attorney because, on the one hand, usually the immigration office does not take into account all the favorable circumstances or the overall circumstances which speak for the applicant and sometimes only pick out one argument in order to reject the application immediately. The immigration office often overlooks legal or regulatory requirements that should lead to the granting of the right of residence. For example, there are commercial contracts or other contracts between Germany and many countries in the world, which are intended to facilitate trade relations between countries and thus also the establishment of foreign companies in Germany. This means that sometimes the requirements for a foreigner foreigner wishing to set up a business here in Germany are not as high as those set out in paragraph 21 of the Residence Act, because in individual cases there may exist favorable commercial agreements between the countries. All these legal subtleties are not always comprehensively examined by the Immigration Office. But the reason for this is also that the Immigration Office in Germany, especially in Berlin, are still overloaded because of the continuing refugee crisis. Therefore, at the latest when you receive a hearing letter from the Immigration Office, which is always accompanied by a deadline for submission of your opinion, you should contact a lawyer and have your legal situation individually examined. The lawyer will then in writing present to the Immigration Office the circumstances that are favorable for you. The most important thing in the application procedure is to avoid a lawsuit. This is why it is so important that you prepare the application to the Immigration Office very carefully and react in time to any deadlines set by the Immigration Office. If you receive a letter from the Immigration Office stating that the Immigration Office intends to reject your application for the right of residence, you should always react in good time, contact the Immigration Office and parallelly involve a lawyer. After a deadline, the Immigration Office only issues a negative decision, and if it is in Berlin, it means that you must immediately file an action at the administrative court. We urgently advise against any legal action in Berlin, because the legal actions at the administrative court last at least 1 year up to 3 years, which is fully unacceptable for an entrepreneur who will rather go to another country in such a case and found the business there. We point this out to the Immigration Office again and again in practice, but unfortunately it still happens that letters of hearings are sent prematurely, also because the Immigration Office does not always deal intensively with the application, because the Immigration Office is often overloaded. That is why it is of the utmost importance for you to know you cannot do anything with a negative decision from the Immigration Office unless you want to conduct legal action on duration of 1 until 3 years. That is why you should avoid legal action in any case. From time to time we also get the question whether I actually have to pay my lawyer if I don't get the right of residence at the end. A clear answer: yes, of course, because your lawyer had spent time and effort on your case. To comment on the hearing briefs alone leads to a great amount of work for your lawyer, since this letter has an aim to convince the Immigration Office that you do fulfill the conditions for the right of residence and thus to prevent legal proceedings. The work takes a lot of effort for the lawyer. On the one hand, the entire facts must first be clarified. More precisely, it means that the lawyer has to deal intensively with your company and understand your business concept in order to be able to explain to the Immigration Office why your company has positive effects on the German economy. That is all the effort your lawyer has to put in, which you, of course, have to pay accordingly, even if you do not get the right of residence in the end. Now you know how to apply for a right of residence for your self-employed activity, your company foundation in Germany. To sum up, we would like to point out once again: you have to prepare the application to the Immigration Office very carefully and draw up a well-drawn business plan, ideally in cooperation with lawyers and tax consultants in Germany. In any case, it is important to avoid legal action, especially in Berlin. With legal action, you can start your business at the earliest after 2 until 3 years, and therefore your application must be prepared as best you can so that you do not have to deal with any legal actions at the court. Contact a lawyer not later than after you have received a hearing letter from the Immigration Office stating that the Immigration Office intends to reject your application for the right of residence and sets a deadline for you to respond. The reason is simple. A lawyer has then the opportunity to convince the Immigration Office out of court that the requirements for granting the right of residence are met and can thus save you years of legal proceedings. And once you have been granted the right of residence, then the work really begins, because there are a lot of regulations for entrepreneurs in Germany which have to be observed, especially in tax law. Therefore, here's a clear appeal. Especially if you're doing business in many different countries, you should also get a tax consultant and a lawyer specializing in tax law to help you in Germany so that you do not make strategic mistakes right from the start. You can also find more information about starting a business in Germany in the link below in the video description on our website. And if you like this video and it helped you with the application process, please give us a like. We will inform you about further videos if you subscribe to our YouTube channel and give us a feedback in the comments about your experience with business startups in Germany, with the immigration office, trade offices, or with other authorities. We are curious about your experiences and I wish you good luck with your enterprise establishment in Germany.
Frau Rechtsanwältin gibt Auskunft und Rat. Nimm dich in Acht oder du wirst verklagt. Du wärst nicht der Erste, der kauernd am Boden lag. Weil Frau Rechtsanwältin um die Ecke kam. Um die Ecke kam.